So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the virtual chapter for July 2020. Barbara Walters would like that, I'm sure. So wonderful, wonderful month, by the way. The middle of the summer, you can see Florida is in full bloom, and obviously, so is this moderator. And I'm joined by my co-host, the charming and talented Karen Han. So hello.
Hello, hello. How are you? Good to see you.
Coming to us from the windy city of Chicago.
We look like partners tonight. We're even kind of dressed alike.
Yeah, and we walk alike, we talk alike at times. Oh, that's because we're identical cousins.
That's right, or kissing cousins.
That's just an obscure reference for anybody who's in the know. Not the kissing part, but the identical part.
Okay.
Because we are identical, except for the fact that we look different from one another.
That's right. That's
All right. So here we are for this evening, and welcome. We're glad to be with you for our July meeting. Our topic, a couple more announcements, don't we have to make, because people can get CEUs.
CEUs, yes. People can get CEUs for joining us here. If you're here live, oh my gosh. But if you're watching the recording, you qualify for the CEUs too. All you have to do is log on to IACT or IMDHA, tell them you spent the time with us, and you've got it. Plus, that's not all. Plus, all friendly hypnosis associations will also honor this for CEUs, ICBCH, IHF, and all the friendly ones. Just tell them you're here, and they'll also give you the CEUs.
And of course, IACT and IMDHA as well.
Isn't that the one I said first?
There you go. Well, you should. Okay.
I plugged in first.
and by the way, here's one of the things that we notice. Have you noticed this, Karen, that because we are in the age of COVID, and people have been doing what they've been doing for the last, March 13th, I think, or something like that, is when we started hunkering down here. Almost
March 12th for us.
Almost 4 months now, or about 4 months now. In that length of time, I've discovered that everybody on the planet has gotten a whole lot better at Zoom.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's using it.
Necessity is, the mother of Frank Zappa. And
I actually got a call yesterday from a new client who said, I don't know it. I don't want to learn it. Can we just do it by phone? I'm really good on the phone. And I said, yeah, sure. We can do it by phone. Not a problem.
Well, my mother, who has been cloistered in a assisted living center for this whole time, somebody managed to smuggle in a portal to her. So now she's got and it scares the hell out of her, and she doesn't really know if she's going to be able to work it. And I say, all you have to do is say, okay, portal, call Michael Watson, and my thing will ring. So she figured it out, and that was really nice. So technology is working out for us in so many ways, and push has come to shove. So how cool. So we got some announcements to make, I guess. Karen, you got any?
I would love to make an announcement about Mid-America, the Mid-America Hypnosis Conference. I don't have anything official yet. I'm on the board, so let me tell you, it doesn't look like it's going to be live. I mean, Chicago's not going to be open in October. And yet, we have the best model in the world, IACT, IMDHA, and Michael Watson. And so we're really looking into, at this point, making that a virtual conference so that we still have our presentations. We have lots of presenters with some dynamic stuff to make, and people from overseas. So even the overseas presenters who, their countries won't even let them come here, even the overseas presenters can still present their stuff. So we're working on that. I'll just tell you that. We're working on it, and an official announcement coming down the pike soon.
Well, we'll be watching for it, and you'll post something on the chapter, of course, when you know what's going on.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And I did hear that the Canada Hypnosis Association, or what's it called?
The Canadian Hypnosis
Association.
Yeah. They did cancel.
Yeah. I just heard this the other day.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to wonder. I am the president of the HEA. We've got a meeting in November here in Florida.
Well, in Florida, you can go, for heaven's sake. In Florida, you're dancing around now.
Oh, yeah. That's true. Might as well bring some more folks in so that you can send you all back with some Florida sunshine. Yeah, it's kind of, kind of amazing thing.
I'm
So,
available to Zoom on in.
so we'll see how it all progresses. But other than that, no other announcements that I'm aware of, except Joseph. I'm going to introduce you in a minute, but this would be a good place to mention you're working on a book, or you got something going on.
Yeah, I'm working on a book that's ostensibly, or at least superficially, intended to help people with who are experiencing religious trauma. But the secondary audience is really for hypnotists, because I realized that a lot of the knowledge that is necessary to truly help these folks, depending on their religious background, is an understanding of that. So the book contains a whole bunch of stories that will lend themselves to, by the way, I have another client who, or metaphors or narratives that will help clients. So if you're a hypnotist and you're dealing with this, the reading of the book, while it's not directed toward how to hypnotize people, it's really a source of information for hypnotists as well, so that they could help these folks.
That's incredible. That's
yeah,
good.
it should be out, I'm guessing October, but and it's self-published, so I don't have to wait for somebody else to say okay. But I'm taking Richard Nongard's How to Write a Book class, very informative, by the way. And it's just, it's coming along very nicely. Anthony's in there too.
Right. Well, we'll be looking forward to that. So, so Karen and I would like to introduce tonight an idea. The virtual chapter monthly program is an hour and a half, and the reason that we extended it from that, you might remember that it used to be an hour. The reason we extended it from that was that we were hoping for the opportunity to present maybe some features and little things, as well as our hour with a presenter. So we first of all we're going to introduce one tonight. We're just going to talk for a short little time about a topic that came up, but we'd also like to encourage all of you, if you are participants in the virtual chapter on Facebook, then great, watch it, participate in it, post some stuff. If you are not, please join virtual chapter on Facebook. It is not the virtual chapter, by the way. It's virtual chapter.
It's virtual chapter.
I saw another one come up the other day too, except there's only one of them that has Karen and my smiling face on it when you look at the listing on Facebook. So that's the one that you want. And we want to encourage you to start using the group to bring up some questions and things about hypnosis that will sort of let us know what your interests are and what it is that we might want to even cover more fully in chapter meetings. So please participate in there just to bring up topics. So the one topic, Karen, you want to talk about it? You mentioned.
Yes, it came up a couple of times recently in forums and conversations that I was having about dual inductions. And a couple of years ago at the Mid-America Hypnosis Conference, I did a 1-hour seminar on presenting several dual inductions. And in my perspective, first of all, Michael asked me if they were going to be dueling inductions, if we would be using swords or or guns or whatever.
You got to be careful how you spell it.
That's right. In his style, of course, he asked that, and I spelled it correctly, by the way. And in my impression, it was a couple of things that you could do 2 at a time, like 2 different voices, or I use as an example the Betty Erickson visual auditory kinesthetic. I can see. So the hypnotist might say, I can see whatever. And the client would say, I can see. And then you do 3 of those, and then I can feel, I can hear, and then you do 2 of those. And both people say something they can do as the trance develops, and it becomes very trancey. So that was my interpretation of it. Michael said, oh, well, that's not the way I saw it at all. I saw it this way. And some people I was talking to recently had an entirely different definition of it. So I thought it was interesting that we all are hypnotists. We all speak the same language, but we have these different terms for things. So I thought it might be a good idea if you, Michael, would kind of explain what your vision of that dual induction idea is.
Sure, because I make a distinction between what I would call a dual induction and what I would call a mutual induction. And that is, so for example, let's say that you and I are going to go into hypnosis, and there's a process that I learned, and I can't get into a whole lot of detail about it here, but basically where we are, I think as you suggested before, we're it's a variation on the Betty Erickson thing, the way that I learned it. That is that I might say, and have you at the same time, here's how I learned it, say the same phrase, which is, now I'm aware that I see, and then each of us would say something that we see.
At the same time.
At the same time.
Yes.
And then we would say, now I'm aware that I hear, and each of us would say something that we hear at the same time. When Stephen Gilligan taught this to us, by the way, he called it Italian family therapy, because everybody's talking at once. That was his ethnic explanation.
Right.
And then we'd say, now I'm aware that I feel, and we would both say something that we feel. And then we would continue, see, hear, and feel. But the things that we saw and heard and felt, remember, the intention for us was to go into trance together. So no resistance is involved. The things that we could see and hear and feel didn't have to be things that were outside and around us in the room. So in the middle of that, of a string of 3 or 4 of those, I might say something like, now I'm aware that I hear the sound of children laughing. And there's a magical place in this process after about 4 or 5 rounds where instead of doing this at the same time, it becomes antiphonal. And to give you the example of how it was for me, the first time I experienced this, it was Stephen himself. And this is why this is so very important to me, because Stephen Gilligan is my favorite teacher ever. And he taught the first day of a hypnosis class that I was teaching. Because we wanted to get him to come and do some part of the class, and he was only available for the first day, and I'm still a new hypnosis teacher at this time, right? So Stephen got up there and he just wowed them with amazing concepts and things that nobody had ever thought of before. And every time somebody raised a question about something that he wasn't really interested in talking about, something really much more basic, he would say, I'm certain that that's something that Michael will discuss with you over the course of the next several days. And he created my curriculum by force. It was really kind of a cool thing. But at the end of it, he invited me to be the demonstration subject for this process. And it was kind of a nice little torch passing thing that he did, because so together we are seeing, hearing, and feeling things. And we're sitting in those really high director chairs, the kind of wobbly ones in the front of a training room in California. And at one point, what I said was, now I'm aware that I feel the movement of a horse's body. I don't know why that came to me, but the wobbly, like you're sitting in a saddle or something. And instead of going with me, Stephen commented on it. He said, that horse over there. So suddenly the whole energy shifted. And it was my turn. And I said, and he has something important. And Stephen said, to say to you about, and I said, the nature of human communication. And Stephen said something else, and I said something else. That together was really kind of an interesting thing. And yet neither one of us seemed to be running it. It was this really kind of organic experience of being so engaged with another person inside that hypnotic bubble, if you will, that I will never forget it. So that's the kind of way that I think of. Now that's what I would call mutual trance. Whereas dual inductions, as I learned them, I learned them from just examples that were given us, even provided for us by some friends and stuff, of Carol Erickson and a guy named Tom Condon, who created these incredible inductions. And Carol would say something, and then Tom would say something, and Carol would say something, and Tom would say something. And by the way, left and right, in headphones. That's what they were made for back in the days of cassette tapes. But the thing that was interesting is, at first they seemed to be together. They were talking about the same thing. They were saying alternating sentences about getting comfortable, relaxing, and going into trance. But as it unfolded, Tom started telling a story. And Carol started offering something that were more indirect suggestions and curious wanderings of the mind that were not a part of that story. And so what you find yourself listening to consciously with the headphones on is, the story's kind of interesting right now, and I'm paying attention to that, but all of a sudden there's something over here. And, you know, and you find yourself going back and forth in this sound environment. It was really profound. And some people absolutely hate that, by the way. I mean, I really loved it. And some people absolutely hate it.
Right. My first trainer, Patrick Porter, did double voice inductions, and he did very much what you're talking about, except they were both his. And he would start talking and saying something in the right ear, and then his voice would say something else on the left ear. And as it evolved, this would become a story or some line, and this would be the suggestions, whatever you happen to be working on, in a very direct suggestion way over here, interwoven in and out. And you back and forth. What do I listen to? What do I listen to?
Now, once in a while, Carol and Tom would do something really cool. Like Tom would say something like, so they were sort of off on their own things, except there were places where the sentences of one would run into the other. So Tom might say something in your left, you're like, and you really don't know. And Carol would say, do you understand that, blah, blah, you know, and she was going somewhere else. But there was that embedded, you really don't know, do you thing in the middle of it. That was just really clever crafting. Yeah. So I like that stuff. I see something that Catherine has her hand up, and you want to open your microphone, Catherine, for a second?
Yeah, that kind of trance that you were just talking about, where one person would say something, the other person would say something, and it would drop into the space.
Yeah, yeah.
I listened to a tape like that a number of years ago that I took out of the library. It was so fascinating to me. But I was a brand new hypnotist at that point in time. And I've never found anything since then that would be able to help me to craft that kind of an induction or a trance or whatever, where there's two separate quote unquote storylines going.
Yeah.
But they one side keeps dropping into the space where the other one is taking a breath. It's
right. Well,
if
just
anybody knows, I would love that resource.
Yeah.
Notice, if you will, that we mentioned a bunch of different styles along that way. I don't think there is a right or a wrong.
Yeah. Well, that's correct. I think sometimes we misunderstand each other because we've learned, as you pointed out right at the very beginning of the conversation, we've learned this is the name for this thing. And then somebody else says, well, I have that name attached to something else.
Right.
The thing we need to start paying attention to is being a little less fundamentalist, and a little more, which might be bridging the way towards Joseph's conversation later, but a little less fundamentalist and a little more open to paying attention to experience and what it is that works, and worry a little less about whether we're calling it the right thing. And
right. Or just be flexible and play with it and see what happens to work.
It's interesting to think that there are a lot of things that Erickson might not have even had names for.
Well, that's right. Isn't it interesting that Bandler and Grinder may have named a bunch of his stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a lovely little chat.
So if you like that kind of thing, and if you have something that you want to learn about, or you want a technique that you'd like to explore, or you've got an idea or a concept or something, a question you'd like to ask, put it on that Facebook page, and we will add this little feature in from now on and make sure that we bring something that you can definitely take away. All of our speakers will too. So now you're getting a double whammy.
Oh my God. No whammy, no whammy.
That's a game show, I think.
So that's a whole other thing, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, we have a guest tonight. You know that?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Joseph Onesta.
Yes, and what do I have to say about Joseph Onesta? I've got some notes somewhere. He's that fella that you've already heard talking about his book, by the way. But I'll tell you, and I'm fascinated. I'm really excited about this topic, Joseph. So I'm thrilled that you're here. one of the things I want to tell you about Joseph is that Joseph was a student of HPTI and graduated through HPTI. 700, count them, 700 hours of education and hypnosis, well beyond the standards set by any of the certifying agencies. In fact, like more than three times. So well done there. And in fact, I was your NLP teacher for HPTI.
You were?
As I recall. That is where I first met you. I know somewhere, it's not part of your official bio, but I want to mention it here because I think it's relevant. It's certainly relevant to me. Before you were doing hypnosis, back in the day, you were involved with the AIDS Project Los Angeles, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
Lovely, and a man after my heart. At the same time, I was already doing hypnosis, but I was doing hypnosis with the AIDS community in San Francisco at the same times. So, and such great times they were, Joseph. It's too bad we didn't know each other, back in those days. But to me, that speaks to who you are. You are a gentleman with true compassion, with a real commitment to making a difference for the clients that you work with. That really matters to me. You are certified by both IMDHA and ICBCH. You are in a busy practice in Pittsburgh. And one of the things that I loved, I looked at your website, is the best quote that I've seen on hypnosis websites because it puts all the rest of them to shame. It says, "What you won't get from me is hype and bullshit." And I bet you if you Google hypnosis and then start clicking randomly on the sites, 6 out of 7 of them. So God bless you, Joseph. We really just love and appreciate that about you. So on that little bio thing that I was looking at, you said something that early in life you had some really positive and powerful experiences with hypnosis.
Yeah.
Can you just be quick about that?
Sure. I was bullied for most of my life. And, I grew up in a fairly rough part of town, and I did my best to cope with that and to recover from that. But when I was at AIDS Project Los Angeles, there was a woman named Frances who, and also Timothy Trujillo, who was also a guest here in the virtual chapter. But
yeah.
I was just talking to Frances about having been bullied for being the school fag. And she said, "You ought to let me hypnotize you." And I said, "Okay, it was free and why not?" And I had a lunch hour and she was willing. And we ended up doing a regression session. And I found myself at middle school age with a bunch of kids from school that I recognized and could name. And she asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, they're just dumb kids. I want to forgive them. And so we did. We went one by one. I named them and forgave them. And I walked out of that session having thought this was the biggest bunch of bull crap on the planet. It just was not. I believed I was completely conscious the whole time. And I thought, the clients like her, so okay. As long as they like her, I don't care. 25 years later, when I moved back to Pittsburgh, one of those kids called me up. He was on a 12-step program. And he called me up and he was trying to tell me about all, make amends for all of the abuse he heaped on me. I couldn't remember it. And I said to him, I said, dude, I remember you. I remember we weren't friends, but whatever it is that you're talking about, I have no recollection, whatever. So forgiveness is yours, hook, line, and sinker. If I can help you, I'm glad you're getting your life together. Congratulations, But I sat down and I was at a career crisis, not sure what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I realized that I can't name anyone who abused me in high school. I cannot name them. Now, we didn't erase my memory, but the forgiveness healed those wounds. And I even went to my 40th high school reunion. My husband saying, "Was that your good friend?" It's like, you know what? No. We probably spoke more in the last 5 minutes than we did in 12 years.
Yeah.
And, but the truth of the matter is I thought, holy cow, it actually worked. And that's when I contacted, because she's passed long ago. She was in her 70s in 1995. And I contacted Timothy and I said, hey, is this working for you, or are you washing dishes in a diner? And he was excited. He's the one that pointed me toward HPTI, which was the best decision of my life. So I love our tribe. I love our job. I love what I do. I've never been happier in my life, even though some of it's challenging.
Yeah.
So was that brief enough?
Well, that was good. That was great. So now the topic of the day, religious trauma. I tell you, it occurs to me, and I'm really curious to find out where this conversation is going to go. Only because, just as Karen pointed out about different terms in hypnosis, I'm thinking, for example, my husband was raised in a fundamentalist household in a little town called Palestine, Texas, which, by the way, is a church and 4 trailers and a farmhouse. You know, and it is down the road from Nazareth, Texas, which is where David Koresh comes from. You know, and his father was a preacher, and he was beaten regularly to bloodiness, you know, and all of this kind of stuff. So there's that kind of experience that I certainly think can be called religious trauma. I think there are much subtler forms of religious trauma. And I guess maybe the first question I want to ask you is there a distinction, as you think about it, between what we might call religious abuse and religious trauma?
Yeah, religious trauma is, you know, first of all, there's a classic definition of religious trauma syndrome. It's actually defined, but it's defined usually about people who have come out of a religion. So it sort of presupposes I've wised up and I no longer believe what I used to believe, and now I need help adjusting to my life. And that's pretty much the classical thing. But if you wait, and if we wait until you know, people are ready to leave, the abuse has probably been going on for a long time, and the trauma has been building up. Mm-hmm. So you're absolutely right when you think, oh, there are, you know, traumas with a capital T, you know, clergy sexually abusing children, for example, or cultish activities where people are actually harming one another and and then you come to sort of a moment where you realize you can't do this anymore, and you get out and you've lost your family, you've lost your social environment, you've lost your faith, you've lost everything. That kind of religious trauma with a capital T. But there are lots of little ones. And I'll just give you a COVID example, for example. You know, early in the COVID pandemic, there were a bunch of churches, and they were featured on the news, that said, oh no, God will protect us, we're going to services.
Right.
Now, the thing is, how many, and here's a question, how many people went to those services not because they truly believed God would protect them from the virus, but because they wanted everyone at church to think they believed that God would protect them at church. And so they couldn't not go, because if they didn't go, everyone would know that they were lacking in faith. But if they did go, they were risking their lives. And there are people who were literally terrorized into getting into their car and going to a church. Mm-hmm. And that is, you know, I personally would hold the preacher responsible, the pastor responsible for that. But you know, the thing is, well, they made the decision. The social context made the decision for them. And when we understand what it means to be involved in a church environment, we understand then how powerful that can be. So, and you know, you mentioned David Koresh. Those people, in theory, could have gotten up and walked out of that compound, but they couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and
yes.
isn't it possible, Joseph, also, and I think this may also be the case in that environment. Jonestown, by the way, is something else that comes to mind.
Right.
I'm thinking that there's some people that are actually being traumatized and don't even realize that it's happening to them. And by the way, so if I can just put this in and then I'll shut up for a minute, is that with regard to Jonestown, before I came to Florida, I was practicing in San Francisco. And I actually had 2 clients who were not survivors from Jonestown, but who were, how do I say it? Who were like family of people who died in Jonestown. Because they all came out of the Bay Area, and so I'm wondering. This sounds to me like secondhand. They experienced secondhand religious trauma.
Yeah, the people who went to Jonestown, we could call that spiritual abuse. And so when you have a minister or someone who is in authority, with air quotes, and that person who is using religion as a manipulative tool, even without even honestly, if they actually believe what they're saying or what they're doing, this is a possibility. And they're convinced of it. One of the pastors that I served under, I was actually ordained in 1986 as a Pentecostal minister, which are very, very fundamental in terms of views of the Bible and very strict in terms of behavior. And I watched that man attempt to cast a demon out of someone who had no idea what was going on. And of course, he believed that it was real. The pastor believed that it was real, but that person had no experience or context in which to be treated that way. And so I don't know that it was intentional, but it was abuse. And it's not, there's a thing called pastoral counseling or pastoral care, where you listen to what people say and you try within the context of the faith to guide them the best you can. But if that guidance is in fact manipulative or misguided or controlling, a person could be perpetrating. I'm absolutely certain, as a minister, I perpetrated spiritual abuse. I'm absolutely certain of it. And although I tried very hard to always be an open-minded guy, I truly believed what I was saying. And so it's this huge, and pastors are even manipulated by that, because there's a pastor, for example, who is supposed to be an expert on the Bible, expert in theology, trained, an example for all to follow. Yet at home, he's addicted to pornography, beating his wife and terrorizing his children. Sure. And this is another sort of aspect. It's very multifaceted. Did I answer the question?
I think that you did. And I noticed that Lita Grant has her hand up. So I'm opening up your microphone. Go.
Okay, so Lita, go ahead.
What?
Open your, there you go.
So I spent a lot of time studying Tibetan Buddhism and studying with Tibetan lamas. Mm-hmm. And I was pretty young. I was like 17, 18, 19 years old in the Bay Area of California. And I had an experience with a Tibetan Lama who made a pass at me. And it totally and completely spiritually devastated me. The amount of trauma that I experienced from that experience was so dramatic that I completely went into this depression, into this conflict of realities, because I really thought this was an enlightened being. Right. And it was just very shattering for me to experience that.
So Lita, thank you for saying that. One of the things that I want to point out, and maybe I should have started with this, I don't know, but the notion of belief is fundamental to human nature. We have to understand that the way our brains function, the way our minds function, it's this sort of inductive processing of our experiences, and then we form these theses, these hypotheses that our brain treats as facts until they're proven inconsistent. And so, we can grow, but understanding that when our belief system is challenged like that, we lose our ground. It's like if you've never experienced an earthquake, what an earthquake feels like for the first time, where the ground under your feet and you don't know where to go, you don't know what to do, and you're completely lost. That is what it may not even be intentional spiritual abuse, but it is certainly a religious-based or religious contextualized trauma, because your belief system is challenged. And one of the things that I've seen, and this is not here in hypnosis, we are just a bag of jelly beans. There are so many different kinds of hypnotists and so many different perspectives. And in a sense, that's really wonderful, because if you are a potential client, you can find someone who can meet your needs. I think that's really wonderful. At the same time, there seems to be a kind of prejudice, if I'll say it, or a bias about, and most of my clients have been Christian, though not all. Most of my clients have been, at least for religious trauma, have been Christian, not all. And there's this kind of bias about it's silly to believe in that stuff. And let's do a past life regression or something like that. And I've just in talking about this, we as hypnotists, if we allow our religious perspective or our belief system to invade the work that we do, if you're not able to function in a certain milieu, you should refer out. If you're the wrong person, if you've got to impose your perspective on your client, you're the wrong person. You need to be able to listen. Zolita, I've never, apart from my visits to Buddhist temples, I've never known many, at least not Tibetan monks. I have known Thai monks, but the fact that your experience is, and you see that person in that context as an enlightened spiritual being, and you find out that they're human and that they're susceptible to the same temptations, the same conditions that the rest of us are, then wouldn't it be lovely if, for example, Christian pastors could be transparent about their own struggles without losing their congregations, without having to cover up? And in a spiritual environment, people should be free to be exactly who they are. Even in a Christian one where things are rather prescription, I should be free. I shouldn't be able to be, don't invite me to church, come as you are, and then leave like us. It can't just be that. It has to be come as you are, and if there's a change to be made, you'll decide to change it. And even as a minister, I kind of knew that. People would come to me as a pastor and ask me what to believe about certain things. And I got into trouble for saying this more than once. I could tell you what I think. I can tell you what the Bible says. I could tell you what most of the people in this church would probably say to you. But as far as what you actually believe, that's for you to tell me. And that was probably the beginning of my liberalization, because I thought, I'm not going to be responsible for this belief system that, perpetuating something that is so vastly different
Sure.
from anyway. So there are lots of kinds of Christians, for example.
Yeah. Joseph, you said something really interesting a while back. Well, all this has been very interesting, but particularly got my attention. When I was in college, and you referred to this about like with Waco and those places, you said those people couldn't leave because, in fact, it would it would show them or they had to go to the meetings. That's it. They had to go to the COVID meetings because it would show them as somebody who didn't have any faith. When I was in college, I was a pre-seminary student, but a much more traditional religion. I was an Episcopalian after all. And among the students on campus, there was Campus Crusade for Christ, right? Which you might be familiar with.
Absolutely.
So, kids getting together, sitting in a circle, playing guitar, singing Kumbaya, and loving Jesus. So these people walked up to me and said to me one day, "Do you love Jesus?" Episcopalians don't ask that question quite so directly. It took me aback for a minute, and I thought, well, of course I love Jesus. Don't be ridiculous. I mean, it was like, so yes. Well, so if you love Jesus, then you're really going to love hanging out with us because we're going to play the guitar and sing Kumbaya and all this stuff. And a freshman in college. So I was kind of drawn into this. And there was a fragment of this group. There was a girl that had a wooden leg, as a matter of fact. I remember very specifically. And suddenly this preacher had come to town who was loosely associated with the Assembly of God, and his name was Brother Thomas. And Brother Thomas not only sort of insisted upon speaking in tongues, and it was a big holy roller thing, but that he told this girl that if she got the Holy Ghost, that her leg would grow back. He literally told her that her leg would grow back. And somehow or another, that wasn't too preposterous for her. She was Magdalene in this. She's like, I'm there for this. So anyway, I went to a couple prayer meetings. One of the things that did happen is they cast the demon nicotine out of me. So I thank the Lord for that.
Well, great.
Yes, hallelujah. And then they were having a prayer meeting, and this Brother Thomas wanted to build a church in my college town. He was from Australia, by the way. He was an infant. And there was a small community of people gathered there. And he said, the Lord has told me that the money that we need to build this church is in this house tonight. And everybody's doing their basando, basoya, and dancing on the chairs and stuff. And the lady whose house we were at went upstairs and came down with ropes of pearls that had belonged to her great-grandmother and gave them to this man.
Oh.
And I remember after the fact thinking, holy Christ, how she's going to wake up one day, and have been, stolen from, in the name of the Lord.
Let me back up in that story just a bit. Did the girl's leg grow back?
No.
Okay.
A little stump. I mean, a little bit. It had a place on the wall.
No, that's a trick. It's a parlor trick.
But when it didn't, nobody questioned that?
Well, they would eventually if she loved God enough.
Well, and for her, the trauma to her is that I'm loving as much as I can. Will I ever be good enough to reach this?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not enough. So, by the way, I want to point something out because the time is moving along. It's lovely. We've got plenty of time. We've got 45 minutes left, as a matter of fact, or almost.
I have to jump in real quick and say Jim Kelly, by the way, had a question too. He had his hand up.
Okay, so Jim, we'll get right to you then, and thanks.
Okay.
But I do want to mention there's a lot. I bet we've got a lot of stories, and I really want to hear the stories. I think these are great. But behind the stories, I hope what we can sort of move towards is figuring out. So this is the case. There are all these things happening to people. And what is it that we can do with them, for them, about them? How can we give our best to people that are suffering from these kind of traumas too? So I hope we're headed there.
We are.
Yeah, great. Okay, so who says something? A hand up, and I'm not seeing it.
Funny you should say that
He
you
held
would
his
want to.
hand up visually, Michael.
Hi, Jim.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing, Michael? Good to see you. Yeah, we are headed that way, and I'm glad that to be sensitive to that. Once upon a time, I lived in a religious community. There were over 100 of us that lived in an ashram, and there was daily meditation and this and that sort of thing. I also have been in evangelical churches and in New Thought churches and Catholic. So I've had a pretty good survey. I studied philosophy and great books at St. John's College, so I kind of got some background on all of that. And so, Alita, what you're talking about is as you know now, is a pretty common story of cult abuse. And I have been in relationship with more than one person who's experienced cult abuse. And so I just posted in the chat here, Robert Lifton's, he's kind of the preeminent researcher on thought system abuse. Robert Lifton's 8 criteria for, getting lost in a religious system. And it's pretty fascinating. He was involved in trying to understand how in the world the entire nation of Germany went along with the Holocaust. And so Dr. Lifton's now 94 years old. He is still with us. But he was a young man at the time when he was doing all of this. And he and his cohort came up with some pretty astonishing, simple but powerful truths about how this works. So when I was living at the ashram, there was the fellow who owned the ashram was called himself a swami, and he had a thing about having sex with the hot girls. And I think that it's arguable that guys like to have sex with hot girls, but when you're the head of the ashram and everybody's coming to you for leadership and guidance, it is now abuse to do that and to break that boundary. And so, Zoilita, I have seen firsthand, I couldn't hear your comment, Karen.
When you set yourself up as that leader, when you set yourself up or allow yourself to be placed in that position.
There was that, but to be sure, he also had been encouraged by many people for a very long time to take that spot. And so he was not just self-promoting, he was also promoted, and the people that were, there were stakeholders like Joseph was talking about how you can't leave Jonestown. They start to feel as if they own it, like they're part of it. And I don't know if it's guilt or belonging or the known, but wow. So I have talked to at least 3 or 4 ladies who experienced a similar thing in a similar setting, and a man that I know who's a psychotherapist who's in his late 60s now, who was sexually abused in an ashram in Colorado when he was a young, good-looking guy. And so, this happens, and for some reason, people break these boundaries. So I don't know. I was just inspired by your story to share that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if we all have a story like this of some sort. It wouldn't surprise me at all.
And similarly, this is also the story that we have about priests and pedophilia, and again, and in those cases, again, people who were promoted from within to a position where then they could do what they did.
Yeah, and have it sort of be like enough people are hush about it to where it continues and it proliferates.
I'm eager to hear what Joseph, since you put a lot of thought into this, what your plan is, what your plan of action, treatment, help. How do we help?
Well, okay. First of all, it's really important to listen. And I mean listen very carefully and non-judgmentally, because these people are struggling and struggling to come to terms. So listening is very, very important. And if you accept these clients, you may spend entire sessions listening to what they say without ever, dangling your watch. So listening and understanding what they're saying. If you don't understand the context, depending on the religion, a lot of things are universal. Like what Jim and Zolita are talking about, that's kind of universal. There's a person who's a human being who has been elevated to a position of power or authority and is now abusing that authority. It's very clear, and lots of people join the clergy or accept those positions for the wrong reasons. Right? They're not all, like, people become Catholic priests because it's a great job and you'll have someone to, there are people who do that, and you would think the system weeds them out. But even in the evangelical communities or the Pentecostal communities, people who gain a certain amount of respect, which means a lot to people in that environment, they gain a certain amount of respect, yet they're still human. And, there's that saying that power corrupts, right? And absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so it's really a challenge to remain ethical in that position, especially when you're so lonely. There is a thing called a ministerium. I don't know if you know what that is, but ministers who are local to a community will meet. This is very rarely a supportive environment. It's often a little bit antagonistic. The Pentecostal's not always welcome because we're not real, and because we don't have seminary. Well, we do actually have seminaries for Assemblies of God, and the organization that ordained me is Foursquare, which, if you know about Amy Semple McPherson. So, there is a real denomination, a point there, a doctrine. But most often these people are just sort of ordained by the congregation who thinks that they're important. And when you're exposed to that, it's very hard to maintain your ethics. Which is why I think that transparency is all the more important. There is a church, I think it's called True Faced or something like that in Arizona, where they really just encourage people to take off their masks in church, which I think is very healthy, by the way. But the idea that a person in position of authority abuses that.
I just want to say, though, Joseph, I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to say that is kind of a bad metaphor for COVID times.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw that out.
Masks, yes.
Sorry for the interruption.
Okay.
A good metaphor for authenticity, a rough metaphor for the COVID.
Right.
I get it. Oh, yeah. All right. So no, don't take your masks off, at least in close proximity. But transparency is all the more important. My husband and I used to run a group. I will tell you, we used to run a group called Pittsburgh Open-Minded Christians. It was a home group, and before I set that group up, we don't do it anymore. Before I set it up, I went around to a bunch of pastors that I knew, and I was sort of debating about a statement of faith for the group, because it's a Christian group, right? And they kept telling me to use the Nicene Creed.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I said, it just came out of my mouth, particularly to one of them. I said, well, that would leave the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons out, wouldn't it? And his jaw just sort of dropped. And I said, don't you think that there are sincere Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses? I'm not about correcting their doctrines. It's not my position to do that. But these people have been damaged. Pittsburgh Open-Minded Christians catered mostly to people who had been damaged by religion. And we had, you name it, we had Coptics and Gnostics and Jehovah's Witnesses, Catholics, Episcopalians, Mormon. I mean, we just had everybody. Fundamentalists, evangelicals, they'd all been damaged in one way or another. And there was one woman who actually attended our meetings for more than a year before she could admit to anybody in the room that she was a lesbian. She just couldn't bring herself to say it. Now, in a room like ours, particularly I'm sitting next to my husband, right? We're not, this is an open-minded group. She still couldn't bring herself to say those words, to even admit that she was sexually attracted to women. She couldn't say it for a year. How traumatized did she have to be, not only in her church, but in the context of Christianity? How traumatized did she have to be not to be able to see that we were all fine with it, right? So the idea that we wait until these people are ready to leave is an unfortunate one. And at least the religious trauma syndrome treatment. And by the way, the DSM doesn't even deal with this, because talking to people about their religion and saying that that's traumatic is just not, for lack of a better term, kosher.
Well, pardon me for interrupting, Joseph, but you mentioned earlier that it has a name and an official definition. So who is it that has named this condition?
You know what? I can't tell you, but there seems to be an agreement about the definition.
Okay.
And it's not, the psychological community refrains from using that term. And what they will do is they'll say it's a social trauma or a sociological trauma, social psychology trauma, which is true in some, but it's not the complete story. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I actually hadn't heard of this, although I myself was in a cult and and had to escape, and or at least got shunned when I decided to think for myself. But at the end of the day, what we're facing is this religious environment leads itself to spiritual, it lends itself, not leads, lends itself to spiritual abuse in the wrong hands. And just because I've been hurt by my preacher, or just because I've been disappointed, if you remember Jimmy Swaggart, I have sinned. That was many years ago, but Jimmy Swaggart was in a...
Jimmy Carter as well.
And who?
Jimmy Carter as well.
Yeah. Well, Jimmy Carter lusted in his heart. He admitted.
That's right. Jimmy didn't sin. He lusted in his heart, which of course was sin.
But
he was hot for the Statue of Liberty. So that's not just regular. That's some special hotness right there.
That's something, boy.
That's something.
And so Jimmy, of course, when Jimmy Swaggart sinned with the prostitute in the hotel room, thousands upon thousands of people who had been supporting his ministry had a crisis of faith.
Sure.
And so, you know, how do we help these people? Well, first of all, again, I'll say this: the more fundamental or evangelical the organization, the more Bible you need to know. You need to be able to quote the scriptures and not say things like, well, why would you believe a stupid thing like that? You know, literally, you know, you can't say, you know, people have said things like that even to me. And you know, it's like, excuse me, but I'm allowed to be a man of faith. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not the Pentecostal holy roller that I used to be, but I've grown, right? I mean, I had a friend from college, and I was in a religious community in college that was very strict. And he said to me, and this is 40 years after college, he said, "You've changed." Mm. And it's like, yeah, I'm 40 years older. I'm not 19 anymore. Obviously, I've grown. If you haven't, there's a problem there. If you're still the same as you were when you were 19, you know, and so the whole thing is okay, evangelical, better know your Bible. And if you don't, find somebody who does. right? I got a call from a psychiatrist, literally saying, "Have you worked with people with, with religious trauma?" And it's like, "Oh yeah, sure." Very, very fundamentalist. This guy was losing his family. He was losing every friend he had. He was losing his wife. He was in a job that he felt like he couldn't be himself, and everything was falling apart for him. So we spent session after session after session quoting the Bible and just enlightening, bringing him into a more broad understanding of the scriptures. And that helped him. It helped him make his mind clear. Now, if you don't know that, then just listen, and you're going to have to be like a talk therapist and listen and let them come to those terms themselves. But the more general, like if you're, if someone came to me and said, I didn't like the way the Swami spends his money, and I'm a little uncomfortable with the harem and things like that, I could probably help that person. But if it got down to Buddhist theology, I'd be lost.
Mm-hmm.
I just wouldn't be able to, and I would be looking for someone, at least a resource, and trying to help. So how do I work with them? I work mostly with Christians, right? But all kinds, and I've studied doctrines in most of the Christian expressions of faith, and I'm not excluding Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, right? Why should I? I'm here to help people. And whatever decision they make about their faith, the presumption that they have to leave that faith in order to be well and sane is not a prerequisite. It's not a mandatory thing. Yeah. For example, Zolita talked about her experience with the Tibetan monk. I don't know, Zolita, what your experience is now, if you associate with Tibetan Buddhism or not. It just devastated you. I wouldn't be surprised if you shunned and stayed away from it. But if you did continue your exploration of Buddhist thought, you might know that it was him, not you. Mm. And the thing is, people having demons cast out of them in the Pentecostal, it's like, what's wrong with me? My leg didn't grow back. What's wrong with my faith? Am I being sincere? And how do I live up to this? These people all must have known this. They must have all seen it. They're all experiencing the miracles. But what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
That's devastating. That's just devastating.
By the way, Joseph, so when people have a crisis of faith, I mean, you mentioned Jimmy Swaggart, similarly, Jim Baker and Tammy Faye, and again and again and again. There is something, it ties back to something that you were saying about people's, they could walk out of there, but they wouldn't.
Right.
So now if somebody comes to a realization that I have been duped, and by the way, I'm taking this off. Jim, your comments I think are really interesting about this as well. I got the same sort of thought. So they get this thing, I've been duped. I need help. I'm going to go see Joseph Onesta, maybe. By the way, but a part of my going to see Joseph Onesta also has to do with me feeling really like pardon my French, a goddamned fool for having been taken in the first place. So I've got to deal with how guilty or bad I feel about having been duped, and at the same time trying to hold on to some faith that seems to be slipping away at the same time.
And it's Michael, a great point. Some and a lot of people actually believe that they've been absolutely duped by the faith and not the person. They think that they were stupid to believe this thing. And now those are the people who leave, and now they've got to make a huge adjustment to their lives and their belief systems. That's okay. You can help them with that. I can help them with that. That's great. You come to terms with your own expression. I remember when I experienced, as a gay man and a Pentecostal minister, I had my own crisis. And I remember having to, I was in prayer one day, and I said, look, I'm talking to God. On one hand, I truly believe everything that I've not been a hypocrite ever. I truly believe what's going on here. But I'm still gay. I can't get rid of it. You're not taking it away, and I don't know what the hell to do. Of course, I didn't say the hell because I wouldn't back then. But I don't know what to do. On the other hand, I'm gay, and the Bible says I'm going to fry. Well, I can't reconcile these. I don't know. And the minute I was able to abandon my thoughts of eternity and realize that the life I had to live was right here and right now, I was no longer afraid. It didn't mean that I lost my faith. It didn't mean that I stopped believing. It did mean that if I came out of the closet, I stopped going to church, unless I went to the Metropolitan Community Church, because churches that tolerate, I don't want to be tolerated.
Yeah.
I was going to my husband and I were going to an Assembly of God church here in Pittsburgh for a while. And at some point, I was invited out to lunch. And because I had said things at a men's group or something, I was invited out to lunch. And they were like feeling me up to see if they could hire me to put me on staff. This is a huge mega church, 1,500 people at the service. And we're sitting there talking. I said, wait, I need to say something to you, to the pastor. I said, I need to say something. You know that guy that I bring to church? That's my husband. And he sort of pulled back like this. Of course, the deal was off. He pulled back like this and said, I'm willing to talk to you. I'm willing to tell you anything that you need to know. But that's my husband. And he said, well, if you went further, it would be quite messy. And I said, no, it wouldn't be messy. It would be divorce. Jesus spoke about divorce, not a word about being gay. It would be divorce. Is that what you're telling me to do? He got real quiet. I wasn't going to take his job anyway. But he got real quiet and he said, you're the first gay person I've ever met that wasn't a sexual addict. I looked at him.
I'm sorry to laugh, but I'm curious about how many gay people he'd met before.
You know what? The truth is, and I said to him, first of all, I could sit in the service and pick out 50 or 60. But second of all, I want you to know those are the only ones who are desperate enough to talk to you. And they're not coming to you because they're gay. They're coming to you because they're sexual addicts. Mm-hmm. They need help, not condemnation. Well, after that, everything was arm's length and we stopped going. But, it's like, what am I going, why should I shouldn't have to lose my faith in a nutshell. I'm going to share it with you. I honestly believe that the teachings and life example of Jesus Christ are worth learning about and emulating. Whatever I attribute to him otherwise is, personal. But that's the sum of my faith, the crux of it. And that was when we did Pittsburgh Open-Minded Christians, that was where we stood. I didn't care whether you believed he was the Son of God, he was God, or he was I don't care what you believe about that. I would never correct someone's doctrine unless they said something like, one time the Gnostics said in the time that we were sharing, we all know that Jesus went to India and studied with the gurus. And I just sort of smiled because I was the pastor of the group. I said, well, we don't want to say that we all know that. There is some anecdotal evidence that seems to indicate that, and what may well could have happened. But just because other people in the room don't believe that doesn't mean that they're wrong or you are. Mm-hmm. And, Gnostics are generally pretty cool anyway. But that was her. Yeah. So, if the presumption is you have to leave, and they'll decide. They might decide, to go to a different church or to try. But let them make that decision and nurture that decision in them. And, there are lots of expressions of this. I have people calling me up asking me if I could straighten out their gay children. It's like, what? I'm willing to work with a young person if they're of age, particularly for this, but not to make them straight, to help them cope with the anxiety that their mothers are giving them because they're gay. And, I make that clear to the parent. I said, look, I'm not going to talk to you about what you and what I and your son talk about. I'm just not going to. He can tell you anything he wants, but I'm not going to converse with you about this. You want him to come with me, that's fine. But can you make him straight? I believe in all things are possible with God. Well, let God do it then. If God's not willing to do it, maybe he doesn't want to.
May I just point out the greatest irony?
Sure.
That she's taking her son to you to be not gay.
Yeah, they don't know I'm gay. I mean, I don't wear the gay flag everywhere, but I have a picture of me and my husband.
Irony. Therein lies the irony. Okay.
And wait a minute, not for nothing, but to a hypnotist, which to fundamental or evangelical Christians is like installation of demons.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
So when a pastor comes to me and he's talking about his porn addiction and he wants anger management, but he can't go to anybody else because, and I'm sitting there thinking, you poor soul, first of all, you have no one to go to, that you're desperate enough to come to a hypnotist. That just astounds me.
Yeah.
So, all I can say about me, and this is not a statement of pride, I've never been a hypocrite. I tried to go straight. I tried, and I prayed, and I waited, and I prayed, and I honestly believed. Thank God I didn't get married. Thank God I didn't spawn if gay people have done this all the time, right? I mean, you get married, you have children. I love my wife. Yeah, of course you love your wife. After 15 years of marriage and the birth of 3 children, of course you love her. She's the mother of your children.
Sure.
But I can counsel you even just as a pastor. Jim is raising his hand. Go ahead, Jim.
I am, and that's a really moving sharing that you're doing, and I really appreciate it. I still have to kind of go back to the use of religious abuse language that was so well documented and outlined by Robert Lifton. Mm-hmm. And what you've just told us is a story of milieu control, which is one of the 8 things in his criteria, the demand for purity, and the dispensing of existence that goes along with doctrinal adherence.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and so this is what you were confronted with over this particular personal issue,
right?
They felt like was their business.
Right.
In religious abuse, it seems to me from the time that I have directly had to deal with it, both from being a church member, an ex-church member, I tell my Christian friends, don't ask me to go to church with you because I'm sure that what you're doing is great, but I have been very wounded in the church, et cetera, et cetera. And this has to do with things like demand for purity, milieu control, and the criteria that goes along with being acceptable or not acceptable in system or out of system.
Uh-huh.
If we get clients who come in and they're out of system in their group, in other words, they don't have safety, comfort, or belonging in a group that they're trying to have some control or certainty in, then, they're going to feel alienated and they're going to feel abused.
Yes.
And, and they're even going to feel like they can't go to their regular counselor. They have to go to somebody who's either super under the radar in hopes of being able to fix that. Right. You're, in this case, your story. So what I'm kind of wondering about here is where on a client's affect profile does the guilt and shame of being sort of not acceptable in a system anymore affect them so deeply that they become maladapted in other ways in their life?
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of things that I worry about. And if you were to look at my comments that I've written into the Zoom chat here, it's all about Lifton and his criteria and the milieu control and religious abuse that went on in Nazi Germany and that you have described in your personal experience. I could describe in mine, so I lead it to a little bit hers.
Sure.
And I think as Michael correctly said, we all have our stories. So when our clients come to us and they have experienced religious abuse, it seems to me like something that they've experienced can be found on Robert Lifton's list. And then also, if I want to go ahead and counter transfer, it can be found on my list too, right? As something, some element of my subjective experience matches with theirs, and I try and speak to their experience through that matching. So I don't know. I really like this subject, and I think it's a really cool one, and yeah. I've appreciated your sharing.
There's a difference between conforming to the community and what it is that a person believes. And so remembering that belief is something that has been developed and created over a period of time. And granted, if someone is a convert to a religious movement, they enter in this space of absolute weakness and ignorance. And so, maybe I don't know that, Isaiah is in the Old Testament, right? And so I'm fumbling through my Bible looking for the scripture while everybody else in church is right there. And so, it's that kind of, I'm a novice, I need to learn. And in that position, I am open to just about any kind of correction or any kind of guidance. I'm just open to it if I'm a convert. If I grew up in that, I may know all of those things and also know that it's not something that I exactly hold to. So what is it that I believe, and why do I believe it? Did I come to God because I believed that I would gain enlightenment if I went this route? Did I believe that I would have a better life? Did I believe that I would get heaven, or could I lose that? These are the kinds of things that, when I've got a client sitting and they're telling me about this, and there's a part of me that says, you know what, you need to get out of that church. There's a part of me that wants to say that, but I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do is say, so tell me about exactly what you believe. And then I'll question it. It sounds like I'm operating like a therapist, right? Where it's like, well, really, do you believe that? Because you said the other day this, and I'm just wondering how those two go together. And I'm not challenging you, I'm just curious. And so they begin to see the inconsistencies without losing what they truly, they come to define it rather than letting other people define it for them.
Yeah.
And so you're right about all of those things. And that church itself may be really abusive. And if it is, they'll decide it, they'll figure it out, and they'll walk away, and they'll either find something that makes it for them or not. But they'll be better equipped for that decision. If I used to say, I was one of those people, I'll be honest with you, Jim. I had held a microphone at Times Square and preached loud and clear. And I was a hellfire and brimstone guy. I didn't exactly at the end, but I was, that was me, and handing out tracts and all sorts of things, doing park ministry, praying for people. That was me. And my best friend, who was in a fraternity in college, used to come out, because we used to pass out tracts outside the fraternity party, and he'd say, look, can you go? Could you just leave? Go over there, because you're hurting our business. He would tell me that. So the thing is I know what I believe, and I'm comfortable with that, and it doesn't matter to me anymore about the environment. There are other people for whom the entire purpose is the social environment. The entire purpose, 99%, is the social environment. Where am I going to take the kids on Sunday afternoon? And we have the ice cream social twice a year, and this is their whole world.
Yeah.
So to rip them out of it may be an act of cruelty and another act of abuse. At the same time, when they decide, I'm not so sure I want my kids to think this way. And how do we get them to be there? That's the thing. And each person is individual, and these are not one session, one and done clients, watch the watch and now you're not religious anymore. This is dealing with the essential belief system of the individual, not the system, but the belief system of the individual. What is it that I believe? And so I was that preacher, and I got boiled down to, Jesus was a cold dude, at least what we know about him through the Bible. Can't even say that that's even for sure, all of that stuff, because of the transcripts, and there are no original transcripts. Like, tell that to a fundamentalist, they'll go crazy. And there are no original transcripts. Everything is at least 300 years old, and even the earliest manuscripts we have don't agree. So which one are you going to use? All right.
The ones that suit us. Joseph, forgive me for interrupting. I
Yeah.
didn't do that.
Oh, we're almost done.
But
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the clock. That's exactly right. And we've only got about 4 minutes left. And Zelita has her hand up and has.
Oh, I'm sorry, Zelita.
So,
It's okay.
So
So to follow up on my experience, because what I had to do was recognize that I still had those kind of core beliefs, but I could not belong to that community.
Mm-hmm.
And in not being able to belong to that community, I think it really affected my ability to become part of a community.
Yeah.
Because I've spent the last 60 years in personal spiritual exploration, but I've never really been able to bond with a community.
yeah.
And I think it was because of that experience.
I both celebrate, honor, well, actually it's not both. I celebrate, honor, and commiserate that experience. I mean, I'm not a member of a church, and the only way that I'm ever going to be a member of a church again is if I'm leading it, because I can trust me, quite frankly. I've been in cults, and I'm just not interested in listening to that sort of stuff anymore, especially the stuff that Jim's talking about that creates that environment. And Jim, thank you so much for contributing in that way. At the same time, so I feel it. If you have explored your spirituality, then you have what you need, and it's not that community. And you can be one of those people who legitimately say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. Legitimately. Most people, that's just an excuse because they don't want to go to church. But someone like you, Zolita, it's, you know, I've done this. It's me too. It's me too. And I have made a conscious decision, although I'll be honest with you, I love Buddhism. But my belief system really rests on the character and teachings of Jesus. So I'm pretty cool with just about, and everything, quite frankly, what he said is actually quite Buddhist. But at the end of the day, I don't have a community either. And you're right. It hurts. And I think a lot of religious trauma people do that. Unfortunately, they become very often damaged in another way. They become these sort of rabid atheists who rail against, and they lose their opportunity to grow spiritually.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing to me. And that's what I want to stop. I want to help them.
This whole belief system trauma area, I think, is something we all ought to pay a lot of attention to in the next couple of months. Because come November, there will be a lot of people who have a belief system of some sort shattered, whichever way it goes.
Whichever way
it goes. So there will be people who have their belief system in whatever shattered, and they're going to be looking for this kind of help. And it's the same kind of trauma technique that you would use in that belief system as you would in a religious belief system, because it's a thematic belief system. On both sides. On both sides.
Karen, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I'm thinking now of a client who peppered his, you know, I'm a gay man, right? Peppered his talk to me with the words libtard, and, you know, and I'm just sitting there smiling and listening and trying to help him.
Yeah. Well, by the way, I might mention that the NATH, the National Association of Transpersonal Hypnotherapists, is meeting in Virginia Beach. So for transpersonal hypnotherapists, mind you, meeting in Virginia Beach 3 days after the election.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see what kind of healing rituals they might, they might come up with as well. It'll be an interesting conference if they in fact have it. We're watching to see.
Before we leave, I just want, Joseph, for you to sneak in how we get in touch with you, because we are out of time, and I want to make sure that we know how to get in touch with you.
You see my name on the screen there, Joseph Onesta, josephonesta@gmail.com. And my website is Mind Power Pittsburgh, the city behind me, Pittsburgh, with an H at the end, .com. Yeah. Mind Power Pittsburgh. So, you know, I welcome any talk or inputs, and I really appreciate the references and the questions, and thank you so much for participating.
People who like me think he looks like Jeffrey Tambor.
I've been called John Malkovich as well. You know, it's like, gosh, you know, is Jeffrey Tambor very handsome? I'm sure he is if he looks like me.
Incredibly handsome.
Yes, absolutely.
And a lot less scary than John Malkovich. So
that's right.
Yes.
Isn't he Frankenstein in Young Frankenstein?
I don't know. I don't go to movies. I'm so Young Frankenstein, like years and years ago. That one? No.
Yeah.
No.
So we can get
anyway,
we're having this fantastic conversation with us. So let everybody know that you were here. You'll get your time, your CEUs for it.
Yes, absolutely. Send your CEUs and look for the replays tomorrow around about noon. Virtual chapter group on Facebook. And by the way, if you've got any topics and stuff that you want to introduce on the virtual chapter group, go ahead and introduce them. Like I said, it lets us know what you're interested in. So do that. We will look forward to seeing you yet another time a month from now. when we're all even older and even wiser, and that will be great. So, so see you then. Thanks for
joining us. See you.
Night, everybody.
Good night.
Oh, you know what? Wait, I'm sorry. We didn't do our usual thing. Joseph, you're still here.
Oh, yeah. We got to say our thing.
We're about to do magic. Ready? What we're going to do is unmute the microphones so that everybody can tell Joseph how much we appreciate him being here all at once in a mutual induction. So, so go for it, ladies and gentlemen.
Yay, thank you.
Thank you, Joseph.
Yay.
Nice to talk to you, Jim Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you too.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Joseph. Take
Bye.
care, everybody. God bless.
Night, y'all.